In this talk on sexual abuse and rape, I'm going to use this term cognitive dissonance, which psychologists use to explain some of the difficulty that people have after experiencing sexual abuse or rape in moving on in life without any detrimental effects in terms of their attitudes and actions. Cognitive dissonance merely means mixed feelings, and I think most of us understand that, so I don't know why psychologists don't just use ordinary language. I think it makes them sound very like experts if they use clever words. So mixed feelings are sometimes, or they're often, at the heart of the difficulty in moving on after an experience of rape or sexual abuse. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the cultural interpretation and assessment of sexual acts, because it is very much a cultural thing. And it's surprising for us to hear that in some of the tribes in Papua New Guinea, it is normal practice for boys to be involved in homosexual activities as part of their initiation and the progress, social emotional progress towards a final heterosexual marriage. Now, of course, this is something that is completely bizarre and shocking to the Western mind, but these boys, adolescents, experience none of the detrimental effects that men and boys in the Western world experience, because for them it's quite normal, it's acceptable, sociable behavior. And so we're going to talk about how our feelings and attitudes affect us. Now, we also want to look at this question of bonding, because human beings are in fact made to experience close physical, emotional, social bonding. And in fact, it's important that we have these experiences. Now, what happens is that often the emotional and the physical intimacy becomes entwined, and in fact the emotional intimacy is often contaminated with the physical intimacy in the case of abuse or rape. And it is this complex situation and the mixed feelings that are associated with this that make it difficult for people to understand. So I'm then going to look into the whole question of feelings. And it's important to understand that in general, we cannot voluntarily control our feelings. And similarly, we cannot voluntarily control our sexual feelings. This means that when we discover that we have some unwanted or undesirable sexual feelings, we cannot be blamed for having those feelings. This admission must be consciously stated and become a central feature of our thoughts. Now, obviously, although we cannot voluntarily control our sexual feelings, we can control what we do about our feelings. I mean, this is common knowledge. But it's also important to understand that when we discover that we have some unwanted or undesirable sexual feelings, we can find an experienced counsellor to train us in finding better ways of reacting to our feelings, and even how to gradually and systematically change our unwanted or undesirable feelings, including sexual feelings. Now, in this talk, I also want to talk about the question of shame and guilt, because this is again at the heart of the issue of the subject, and it's very difficult to separate and to apportion partial blame where necessary, or partial guilt, from other legitimate feelings, because in some cases shame or guilt might be valid, other cases it's not valid, or part of it is valid and parts is invalid. It's relatively complicated, and I will pull these issues apart and help us to understand what's going on here. Because surprisingly, the perpetrators of abuse or rape, although they are in general the dominant guilty partner, they're also to some extent a victim. And I'll explain a little bit of that as we go along. And when I say the victim, rapists and abusers, sexual abusers, have themselves often been victims at one stage in their life, and they sometimes don't even remember. So this is how we will deal with this particular topic in a number of short series.